Weathering a locomotive for the first time can be quite a daunting task. Getting the locomotive out of its new box and applying dirt to it can be quite scary. But it can be very rewarding too. I wasn't sure about weathering at first, but thanks to Simmersky and Sparkshot, they gave me that nudge to have a go and, see how it goes. My techniques aren't perfect, I know that, and I'm still learning from some of the exceptional modellers out there. But I'm starting to get happy with the results, and I thought in this video I'd show you how I do it. Using photographic references is one of the most important things when it comes to weathering. If you don't use them, your weathering isn't going to be realistic. Look at these pictures. See how the rust has built up on the Q6 around the smokebox door. How the grime has gradually collected over time because it's not being cleaned. Look at the lime scale on the WD leaking out of all the different washout plugs. It's these things, these attention to detail that will really make the difference in your model. So, let's get on with it. The locomotive in question is going to be this. Peppercorn A1 60147 Northeastern. This is how she was from the box, without any detailing added. What I have added is matte varnish. She was sprayed with it about 20 minutes before this footage was taken. The matte varnish is added because the powders apply to it a lot better and will stick. If you don't add the matte varnish, it's a lot harder for it to stick to the model. So, I got the detail pack out and I began by adding the cab doors, before moving on to the front footsteps. And then we added the lamp irons and put the lamps on. And then finally, the front coupling and brake pipes are added, and already the locomotive looks a lot more realistic. To improve the look of the locomotive further, I replaced the printed nameplates on the smoke deflectors with etched ones, and also added a works plate. Don't worry about the excess super glue, the weathering will hopefully cover it up. And let us begin. I start by using the Tamiya weathering powders. They come with this small utensil with a sponge at one end and a brush at the other. The sponge is really useful for applying what I'm doing now, which is the smoke stain from the chimney, which all locomotives had. We now move on to using the car's weathering powders, which come in these sachets, and you just apply with a normal paintbrush, like you can see. This is the soot powder that we are using, and it's just to lose that factory finish look of the locomotive and to stop it looking like a toy and to actually look like a miniature working locomotive. So just apply across the boiler and just spread it out. And once you've spread it out with the brush, really work it in with your fingers. It's the best way to get it to really stick to the body. We now move on to the mud powder from the car's weathering range. I like to use this from the middle section of the boiler downwards. This is just to show the dirt, really, rather than just the grime from the smoke. I tend to try and blend it in though, because you don't want it to look really obvious that you've got a different colour. So really blend it in with the soot, and so you get a nice shading. I now go back to using the Tamiya powders and the little utensil with the sponge on. Weathering is never uniformed and never looks even. Certain areas will collect more grime than others, and that's why I'm using the soot powder in the Tamiya range, just to bring it out more on certain areas of the boiler bands. If you look at a lot of the models that you can buy from Bachmann and Hornby, when they tend to weather, they tend to just give it a spray all over evenly of grime, and sometimes it doesn't look too bad and sometimes it doesn't look very good at all and doesn't look realistic. So like I said before, look at your photographs and look at how weathering and dirt collects. Okay, now we move on to the wheels. Now the wheels were something that I always used to ignore when I was weathering. I was a bit worried about damaging the connecting rods. But as long as you're careful, you shouldn't have a problem. What I would say is when you go back to the layout with the locomotive, really give it a good running in, because it will be quite jerky at first because you've used all these powders on the wheels, and then lubricate the different areas of the wheels just to make sure it runs properly. So now we are going to apply the rust powder from the car's weathering range. Now you don't apply this all over. It's up to you. You may want to, but what I would say is, if you look at the photograph, you'll see that rust builds up in certain areas, and I just want to give a subtle evidence of that. So I'm just applying there to the odd wheel spokes. I use some on the connecting rods, not all over the connecting rods, just on the odd ones. And hopefully you can see that starting to have an effect. But like I said, it's not all over, it's just subtle. Less is more, as they say. And we now move on to the cylinders. Now if you look at a lot of photographs of locomotives in BR days, even when in pretty good condition, there was quite a build-up of rust sometimes around the cylinder ends. So that's what we're doing there. It looks like there's quite a lot of excess there, but I will be using the other end of the utensil with the brush on to clear some of that out. Just putting some of that on the footsteps as well. And now we move on to the smoke box door. Now in some cases you could have some bad burnt marks on here and rust, as you saw with the Q6, but I'm not wanting that. I'm just wanting to show a little bit of grime on the front. So we use the mud and the soot powders again. And now the tender. So first of all, I go over the axle boxes with the mud powder, just working that in. You don't have to take too long on it. It depends how long you want to do on this model for this video. I didn't take a lot of time on that. So we work that in with the brush. You can also add some rust powders in there as well, just to show the wear and tear once again of the locomotive. And now move on to the sides. Now here we've already applied the mud powder, so I'm just applying some soot just to tone that down, so hopefully it will match more with the loco. I did find with one of my earlier weathering attempts that I hadn't really matched the weathering on the tender and the locomotive, and they looked like two separate entities altogether. So that's her pretty much finished. I may add a little bit of lime scale coming out from some of the plugs on the boiler, but I'm quite happy with that. So here's a comparison shot. That was how we started a few hours ago, and that's her now. Ready for work on the layout, I think.